This episode is brought to you by WeatherGuard Lightning Tech. At WeatherGuard, we make wind turbine lightning protection easy. If you're a wind farm operator, stop settling for damaged turbine blades and constant downtime. Get your uptime back with our Strike Tape lightning protection system. Learn more in today's show notes or visit weatherguardwind.com/striketape.
Welcome back. I'm Alan Hall.
I'm Dan Blewett, and this is the Uptime Podcast, where we talk about wind energy, engineering, lightning protection, and ways to keep your wind turbines running. All right, welcome back to the Uptime Podcast. I'm your co-host, Dan Blewett. On today's show, we're going to talk about new plans for a GE wind turbine blade manufacturing plant. We're going to talk about the Biden administration and their plans. They've got some ambitious ideas to get 30 gigawatts of power into offshore wind by 2030. Talk about a Orsted project that's really interesting. It's a hybrid 518 megawatt project that's combining wind turbines and solar. Some interesting technology being used in China, connecting a fixed bottom offshore wind turbine with a floating wind turbine. Of course, they're also installing their first floating turbine there. And lastly, we'll talk about some interesting technology about drone swarms, both by sea and by air. So, Alan, first, how are you, sir?
Great, Dan. How are you?
I'm doing well. A lot of travel last week, but we're back. It's exciting. We've got GE offshore, well, not offshore, but they're creating a new plant for LM Wind Power to manufacture their 107 meter long blades for the Halley 8X. Of course, 107 meters is second best now because they have 108 meter blades, Siemens Gamesa and of course Vestas. It's so funny. They're all just going to add like 6 inches to each blade. But this is up in Teesside, which is, that's pretty close to Scotland, isn't it, Alan?
It's way up north in England on the sort of the North Sea coast on the eastern coast of northern England. Yeah, which is getting to be the norm lately, Dan, is that as these wind turbines get bigger and bigger and bigger and require ships to move them around, and on the offshore, obviously offshore is going to be the biggest growing marketplace, then a lot of facilities that are located near the shoreline are going to be big opportunities. A lot of towns that may not have seen that sort of industry in a while, in terms of large industrial growth industries like wind turbines are going to see a boon, right? It's going to employ hundreds or thousands of people to make wind turbine blades that big, and to get them on ships and to get them where they got to go. That takes a seaport town. So it's fascinating that we're seeing this sort of growth along the shorelines that we hadn't seen in a long time. Don't you think it's going to be a big business there, right along the coastline?
Yeah, I mean, you could potentially in the future see whole towns, be built around these industries, just like shipbuilding yards, with, we're going to talk about the Biden administration trying to put, 30 gigawatts of offshore wind in the U.S. and the New Jersey area. As renewable energy jobs grow, some of those remote towns are going to have to proliferate because you're not going to be able to get good workers there if it's just this little tiny cow town where there's nothing to do, very remote, no one wants to work there. They're going to, I'm sure, put a lot of incentives in to say, hey, build this small town up because we're going to have a lot of factory jobs here and a lot of good, stable jobs for the future producing these blades. And we need a good Main Street. Like we need, people to be happy here, right? So I think they'll be important.
Belfast had done that a couple of years ago because Belfast was a huge shipping manufacturer, or a ship manufacturer forever, right? That's where the Titanic was built, was in Belfast, and all the accompanying sister ships were built in Belfast. So they have all the docks and infrastructure to build ships. And when the wind turbine industry picked up, this is years ago, they were using the docks to move and transport wind turbines because they're right there. They could load up. So it kind of revitalized an industry that had been gone for a number of years. And I think that's what's going to happen is a lot of those old existing seaports and ship manufacturing sites are going to be retrofitted into wind turbine blade manufacturing, wind turbine manufacturing sites, which is great. If that's great news, right? So it's just like SpaceX the other day, I think it was yesterday, or Elon Musk was putting out tweets saying, "Hey, come down to Brownsville, Texas. If you've ever been down that way, it's not the most populous place in the world." But he was throwing like $20 million into this little tiny town to get people to move there because they are going to grow their business there, which is what's going to happen on the wind turbine side. They're going to grow a business in these smaller towns, and it's going to make these little towns explode, at least temporarily. So get it while you can. I think these smaller communities are going to take advantage of it.
Yeah, it's funny you brought that up because that just popped into my head because I saw that yesterday as well, which I'm not as big an Elon Musk follower as you are, but interesting that neither of us talked about that. For those of you listening, neither Alan or I talked about that Elon Musk tweet, but it's funny that we both contextually grabbed that for this purpose because that is interesting. And of course, it's so sad. I looked at some of the comments of Elon's tweet and people are like, oh, this is 0.00001% of his net worth. This is like me donating $100. It's like, people, just be happy. Like, do we need to be angry about everything? Like, he's donating $20 million to a small town to revitalize downtown. That will make a very meaningful thing. And it's like, sorry, he didn't donate it to homelessness, well, there's lots of great causes that could use that money for sure. But it's like, look, this is money going to help some people. Like, why do you need to be angry about everything? I don't know. It was really
it's
sad.
going to employ thousands of people there.
Yeah.
It was one of the tweets I'm pretty sure I saw, which was, we're going to employ thousands of people down in essentially the tip of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have a community that can support it. I'm going to put $10-20 million in the local community to get it up and running where it can support thousands of people, and all the new homes that would be built and all the new businesses that'll pop up and all the new restaurants that will occur. So that, say, $10 million is going to really turn into roughly $100 million worth of investment. So it's just thinking at as starter funds, and it's going to employ a bunch of people, which is great. Good. That's what it should do.
Yeah. Well, and this goes back to the conversation we had with Bjorn Hedges, who's the wind site manager up in Washington State, and he was talking about, like, hey, if you're a person that wants to work in wind, you need to be a person that's okay living in that sort of more country kind of life. Like, you're okay being in a little more remote area, and of course that won't be everybody. So the more you can make that town have a combination of things where people could say, oh, I can have some nightlife, or I can have some, whatever it is that, people want. It's never going to be a big city life, I'm sure, but just to make it more balanced, right now you can grab maybe like 10% more people want to do that job. It's going to be important, because I wouldn't want to personally live in a 5,000 person town in the middle of nowhere. Like, that's just like not where I'm at, even if it was a great opportunity. It's like, sorry, doesn't fit my lifestyle. I'm more of like a city person. So they need to, find a way to get to millennials.
But it is advantageous if you're an employee in those situations. You're going to be in a relatively lower cost part of the country. In northern England is relatively lower cost, but you're still getting paid higher wages. So you're kind of on your so for lack of access to a big downtown or community like London would be, you're making extra cash, and that has a benefit too. And that's why they'll be able to draw the sort of talent they're going to draw there, is because it's a premium. You have this bonus premium because of the economic conditions. You're at an advantage there, which is, if you're an employee, boy, it's hard to pass that up right now.
Yeah, for sure. So moving on, the Biden administration has pledged to create 30 gigawatts of offshore wind power by 2030. They say this is going to employ directly about 44,000 people over time, and they're excited about it. Obviously, the renewable energy is more of a Democratic push, and of course, we're not, on either side of the political spectrum here on this podcast, but I know obviously Democratic folk are going to be real excited about this. Anyone in the wind industry and who really cares about the planet is going to be excited about this. But Alan, does this seem like a target that they're going to be able to reach in just a decade? That seems like a pretty large project off the coast of New York, New Jersey.
Yeah, it is a large project, and when hit with things coming out of the White House like this, basically a proposal to come out of the White House, they're not doing any of the heavy lifting. And all those situations, if you if you were to mark down all the proposals coming out of the White House, I don't care, Republican or Democrat, doesn't really matter, and then follow up with them and have them actually come to reality, it's very few. What drives those projects are the states, and if they can leverage the experience of knowledgeable companies that know how to do that, get them in the state, get some employment up, get those running. Sure. What the federal government can do is essentially open up the space. That's what they can do. Basically, relax or remove some of the barriers that will exist, some of the red tape bureaucracy stuff that will exist to creating this. That's where the federal government can come in. Maybe on some funding side, tax breaks, whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of the heavy lifting is done at the state level, and that's where you see, at least in the United States, you see a number of states that have large wind turbine industries. Is because the states have made it possible. They've leveraged the federal government to come in and help them, and obviously that does aid it. But it really depends upon whether New York, Delaware, Pennsylvania, all those states along the coastline are willing to play ball. Because if they're not willing to play ball, it'll never happen. So that I think this is an interesting take on it. In terms of the administration sort of proposing it, I haven't heard a lot from the states saying, "Yeah, we're going to do it" yet. That's what I'm waiting for.
Yeah, and of course we reported on the alliance between Maryland, North Carolina, and a couple other northeastern states recently. So it seems like this is already something that people were thinking about and hoping to do. And now it just seems like if you got the thumbs up from, the White House, then like you said, it's just going to remove some barriers and make it easier where people are like, hey, maybe this isn't as risky as it was, because we start to put all these gears in motion, and now it just sort of gets stopped, at the White House level. But now it seems like there's not going to be any barriers, at least. So if states really want to pursue it, then they should feel like, okay, hey, this could potentially be viable, and we've everyone's on the same page. So that seems like a good way to go.
But we should be holding the White House accountable in this sense. When they make proposals like this, which are 10 years out, and the president is in office for 4 years, maybe a maximum of 8, and you got a 10-year proposal, you're not going to be around when people will be held accountable if it did or didn't happen. If they're really on the ball and want to make something good happen, then say it's going to be done in 4 years, or set a lower bar and get it done in 4 years. I think those are remarkable checkpoints that if you really want to get some initiative behind it, then that's what you'll do. It's just sort of like the John Kennedy, we're going to send a man to the moon and back by the end of the decade. Well, that was set in 62 and he died in 63, and they finished it July of 69 or August of 69. Kennedy, even if Kennedy was alive, he still wasn't going to see if that was going to come to fruition or not. I think his death probably propelled it more than anything else. But the White House and the administration really ought to tighten up those goals. We can do a lot in 4 years. You'd be surprised. Industry's ready to go. We are ready to have offshore wind. We can do with this in 2 years if we really wanted to.
Yeah, well, and speaking of which, so Orsted has committed to a 518 megawatt, really big wind farm in Texas. And so like they've essentially it doesn't seem like they've started construction yet, but they expect to be operational in the first half of 2022. So like you said, of course, offshore is much more complex, right?
It is. It is.
And like you said, the systems and permitting, all that stuff is probably not as quick in a state where there's not nearly as much wind power as in Texas, where they've been doing this for quite a while now. Yeah. So this is a really interesting project, though, that they're combining solar and wind. I'm sure just like the topography and the geographic location just fits that really well. They're also replanting a lot of like native grasses underneath the solar panels. So it seems like they're trying to do as much environmentally as they can, because I know that's a common complaint about solar, is that it just takes up all this space, this huge footprint on the ground, and then it's like, what happens to the wildlife there, et cetera, et cetera. So it sounds like they're doing a good job to hopefully pump some vegetative growth back into that area.
Right. Well, they're trying to maximize the usefulness of the land that they have, and I think that's smart. If you're going to do wind or solar, you want to maximize the amount of energy you can get out of it. If you're going to do it, do it. And don't and like in a lot of places in my state, like on wind turbine sites, they tend to be smaller, 10, 12 turbines in a spot, or one turbine in a spot. If you're going to go through the process of trying to gather wind industry, you need to do it to some reasonable level. And I think Orsted has been around long enough to know how to maximize the energy out of a useful space. So this makes a lot more sense than some of the smaller projects we hear about on the East Coast of the United States. It really does.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to see how this is laid out when it comes to fruition. I haven't seen the plans, but are the solar panels going to be really kind of butted up towards the bottom? Like how intermingled are the two things? I'd be really curious to see that, because as I was flying home from Phoenix yesterday, so seeing some of these wind turbines as I was flying in and making my descent into DC, it just, you could see like there was all this extra area, not necessarily excavated, but just cleared around it. And if these are on the top of a little crest, I wouldn't say like a mountain range, because I don't know there's really legit mountains in West Virginia, but there's at this it had to be a pretty sunny location, relatively speaking, right? Not obviously not as sunny as perhaps Texas, but yeah, you wonder if you could just like sprinkle some solar panels underneath them, just like you would mulch almost. That's kind of how I wonder if this would be like solar panels could be. It's kind of like mulch, where they're just lining all the extra unused space, obviously within reason, because you potentially have a crane come in and do all the maintenance and repair and all that stuff. But
sure,
it'd be interesting to see how they could just like what they do with the offshore, or they're trying to do with the offshore turbines, which is make them multi-purpose, right? They're trying to have aquaculture labs and all these different things and stuff attached to them. Maybe solar can really coexist and intermingle, because it's a very well proven technology.
I hope so. We need to do more of it.
So moving on, speaking of offshore, there's a Chinese project with, so Orient Cable has won a contract. This is reporting from offshorewind.biz, that they're going to connect a fixed bottom offshore wind turbine with a floating one. And Alan, what is the purpose of connecting these two?
Utilizing more energy in a certain fixed space, right? You have an anchor spot, and so you can leverage that anchor spot to then put floating turbines, which are going to be all the rave here in the next couple of years. Hook some floating turbines to this anchor turbine and sort of keep them in place. It may make the whole installation simpler if they can make it work. The trick is, how to coordinate everything mechanically so you have this organized system that's gathering power. It's a little more complicated than they make it seem. But we're going to see a lot of innovation like this, where we're going to leverage what we know and what we have existing with new technology. And I think that's the way a lot of technologies work, is that you start from where and you kind of grow it incrementally to something that's more complicated, or takes more infrastructure, or takes more engineering know-how to do. Those little small steps that happen in engineering we always forget about are super important to get to the final goal. And it seems like this project is set up to do that, right? It's sort of that incremental approach. Let's take this next step and the next step and the next step. This is just one of many that are going to happen over the next 5 years or so to expand offshore wind turbines. And I think that, well, as we saw in South Korea, they're making a huge push in offshore wind to grow the industry. One, they have a huge shipping manufacturing shipping industry, and obviously have a lot of shoreline. So even in South Korea, they're all headed that way. You're going to see China do it. You're going to see the United States do it. You're going to see Europe do it. Spain's already doing it. Gamesa's already doing it. India will do it. It's just going to be a natural outgrowth of, we're going to have a lot more wind turbines offshore. We will. Yeah.
Well, it's funny, even, we've hit so this is episode 54. So we've hit the year mark on this podcast. I feel like we started in April, but I guess we didn't, because we really haven't done like 2 releases in a week. Right. Maybe we did, maybe around Christmas or something. I think it was a special episode, but we've hit the year mark on this podcast. And I just remember back when we initially started, there wasn't a lot of reporting on floating wind turbines. There wasn't like a new one coming out every week. And now there's kind of like a new announcement about a floating wind farm, or even just a new test, a new prototype. Like there's been a lot of changes in the last 12 months. And I find that really interesting. And it seems just like everyone's like, hey, this is kind of good to go, is what it seems like, that everyone's gotten a lot more on board with it, that they're more comfortable with the technology, that it's maybe becoming more financially feasible, which in a year's time, that seems kind of crazy.
It is. And it is crazy because of how fast it has evolved. But the consequence of all that is, as the turbines have gotten larger, the number of companies that can compete in that space have gotten a little bit smaller. You have to have a lot of cash to create offshore wind turbines. When you're talking about 6, 10, 12, 15 megawatt machines, there's only a certain number of industries or companies in the world that can even broach that subject realistically. So yeah, we've seen a sort of a push from land-based wind turbines to offshore. Clearly we have. So you're going to continue to see that sort of large-scale industry companies, the Siemens Gamesas, the GEs, continue to push in those spaces because they just have the revenue to create and work in that space. And unless you do, it's going to be really hard to participate in that.
Yeah. One of our last stories today. So this is reporting from Offshore Engineer that there's a U.S. based company working with the University of Portsmouth. So the company's called Ocean Infinity, and they're basically putting together a fleet of unmanned, vessels. So these little robot ships will, be deployed, sent out to the offshore wind turbines, and then on those ships would have flying drones, and they'll have their drones take off. And this is also crazy that, it's none of it's unexpected, right? Like the battery technology, the drone technology, the autonomous vehicle technology, all this stuff is just really coming together. So this seems pretty realistic that, hey, send out the drone ship with the drone on it. And, we talked to last year with the CEO of SkySpecs. He talked about how it's just like one click, at least on their models, that just like one click and the drone is programmed to fly its path and to scan the blade and to do its inspections automatically. Yeah. It was always going this way, right? But what's your take on what Ocean Infinity is doing, and how far do you feel like this is out from being realistically in the field?
Well, I think an interesting accident happened over the last week, which is going to propel this further. So when the cargo ship from Evergreen got stuck in the Suez Canal,
I was thinking about that too. We have like a weird thing going on right now in our brains. That was a fascinating development. Sorry, continue.
Right, but wouldn't that say to you that a human piloted ship of that size may not be the end all be all? Obviously, they put hundreds of ships through there, thousands of ships per month through there. They must a month, right? They must. But it only takes one to go wrong where, all of a sudden you don't have shipping across a significant portion of the world. The drone ship thing is going to start to play into it even more, right? In the sense of there probably will be a human still somewhere around. But if they could have controlled that ship if the canal could have controlled that ship's progress through the canal and had sensed that it was having problems, shut it down before it got wedged into the wall of the canal, they would have done it. And I think if a company that's invested in that area is smart, they're going to start leveraging those accidents into pushing for more autonomous water-based craft, and then obviously that's going to also fulfill a second step, which is the autonomous drones to go off and do inspections. Because as we get to these larger offshore wind turbines, the problem is going to be they're going to be so massive. How are you going to inspect them and continually inspect them to make sure they don't have any significant problems? Because you're going to rely on a turbine more and more and more. Now we rely on hundreds of turbines or dozens of turbines at any one time. But because the scale is going to get bigger and we're going to get more reliant on them, you really can't have one go down. That's what's going to drive having a swarm, quote unquote, a swarm of drones inspecting these turbines. You're going to have that to keep them operational. So it's just, again, that evolution of how fast can you drive it till you get to a point where you are constantly knowing that the wind turbine is in good operational shape and can continue working, or can you flag that problem early? I don't know how you do it one drone at a time. I think it's going to be hard to do that because the scale of wind turbines offshore is just going to be explosive. And how are you going to manage it?
Yeah. Well, and you wonder if at some point, like say you have a huge wind farm of like 100, offshore turbines, if they then also just install a huge like helipad in the center that has some accommodations in it where, we've talked about this before,
Right.
that maybe
Right.
the EVTOL, these electric vertical takeoff and landing, electric helicopters, essentially, they've got a place to land, brings a couple crew. They're going to be there a couple days on this little rig. They've got a port for a bunch of these unmanned vessels. And all right, guys, we're going to be here for a week. And they do their thing from this sort of hub and then
Right.
go back out. With all this electric vehicle technology that's growing, I think it's just going to be really hard to predict what will be the best solution, because those EVTOLs might be great to just bring out a crew and the equipment's already there or whatever, and they go there, fly their drones and do it from that. And they might not need to send 10 boats out. Like, you never know. Or they might go there and then,
right.
be the director, the maestro of the little orchestra of boats that goes out. But it'll be really interesting just to see which of these get started and actually start doing the work and then get going. Just like we've talked about with robots up on wind turbine blades, right? There's Arones, there's Rope Robotics, which we're going to be talking to them in an upcoming episode. There's a bunch of robotics companies also refining their technology, and theirs are going to evolve and pivot, right? And some will fade away and fail, and others will become the chosen one, the golden child. So just really interesting to see all the technology evolve and winners and losers as they do.
Yeah, you're going to see a significant amount of effort applied in that space in the next year or two.
All right, well, we're going to wrap up today's episode of Uptime. If you're new to the show, welcome. If you're a regular here, thank you for your continued support. Please subscribe to the show and leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to check out the WeatherGuard Lightning Tech YouTube channel for video episodes, full interviews, and short clips from each show. For Alan and all of us at WeatherGuard, stay safe, and we'll see you next week. Is downtime causing you financial pain and putting a stop to your power production for months on end? It's no secret, lightning strike damage is a major cause of wind turbine downtime. This damage is preventable with our easy-to-install strike tape lightning protection system for wind turbine blades. Our incredible engineering, build quality, materials, and edge sealants withstand up to 5 times more abuse in the toughest weather and lightning conditions. And we've got the research to prove it. If you're tired of constant downtime, we can help. Reach out to us at weatherguardwind.com and schedule a free call. We'll get your uptime back in no time.